In this episode of the Locked On NBA Big Board podcast, it is going to be a little bit different today. We're going to talk about first impressions. Krysten, Peak, and I, we're going to share our thoughts on some of the first scouting impressions or some of our first times laying eyes on a particular prospect or prospects and share our thoughts and if they've exceeded or lived up to the expectations and just the overall shock about feeling like you discovered a new prospect. Stay tuned. Big shout out to each and every person that has made the Locked On NBA Big Board podcast your first listen of the day. I'm your host, Rafael Barlowe, along with my co-host, Krysten Peak, who has been around this scouting game for, I don't want to make it seem like you've been doing it like a long time, but you definitely have a lot of experiences and a lot of stories to share. So definitely want to hear some of those stories. But before we get into this episode, I want to let you know that your favorite Locked On NBA podcast has a newsletter. Check it out at lockedondaily.com. And if you are not subscribed to the YouTube channel, I have no idea what is taking so long. Please subscribe. Like, share, comment, click the bell so you can be notified every time we drop an episode because we are your daily source for NBA draft content. All right, it is Friday, January 10th. Conference play is heating up. I was up all night writing my mock draft 2.0, and one of the things that was pretty common when I was writing it is like there's a lot of players in the SEC. And the conference is so brutal that, I mean, my mocks are, I mean, they're always fluid, but you can have, two really bad games against the 1 and 2 ranked team in the country if you're in the SEC, and then come back and have another game against a top 10 opponent, which makes me go back and wonder, like, all right, I can't really base all my thoughts on scouting on how the players playing over a stretch of games where they may, face a gauntlet of a schedule. So you're going to have to go back and rely on some of your high school film and some of your first thoughts when you first scouted players. So Krysten and I, we decided to share our thoughts on some of our first impressions or some of the first time we scouted, and maybe we weren't even trying to scout. Maybe we were just watching and ended up noticing a player. So I wanted to talk to you about your first impressions and how much weight do you carry into like a first impression? Because for me, it's like a song sometimes. The first 3 to 5 seconds of a song, I know I like the song. And then sometimes if I don't like it, it's kind of hard for me to change my mind. But when you're like evaluating prospects, how much weight does the first impression carry?
I mean, that's a great analogy, Rafael. I want to say because I see players so young and so early over a longer stretch of time that my first impression is either, like, oh, I really like this kid, or okay, I hope he develops. It's never, or I hope he grows. It's never like, oh, he sucks. Like, I'm never going to like base my decision on first impressions on a 14 or 15-year-old, knowing how much more room they have to grow. I mean, it is glaringly obvious every year at the Nike Skills Academy when they have the current high school players there in one session, and then the next session is the college players, and then the jump in just physicality from high school to college, just being with a nutritionist and being in a weight room. And I know this might sound like we're talking on both sides because our last episode, we just talked about these prep schools becoming more college oriented, but there's something to be said about that 1 or 2 years in college and just how physical you are, how you're adjusting to the pace of the game. So I always love to see the growth of the players, but there are players that we're going to talk about today where I saw them and I was just like, oh my gosh, he can go. And I'm instantly like texting college coaches or NBA scouts immediately.
All right, let's go with Cooper Flagg. He is the player that is probably going to be the number 1 pick. I think it's almost a given at this point. The first time I saw Cooper Flagg play, I had already heard of him. I had watched him at the FIBA 17s and he was like 15 years old. So the first time I saw him was totally different than the first time I saw him in person. But watching him in person, my first impression was this guy is really, really dominant on the prep level. It was more so on the defensive end. I think right now the offense is catching up with the defense. But to me, he was the most dominant high school defender I've personally seen. Like, he literally changed the dimensions of the court. Guys were scared to attack the rim on him. He was blocking jumpers. He was pinning layups at the top of the square. Like, guys were literally running for him. So my first impression of Cooper Flagg, it was a dominant defender. And like I said, the offense is catching up with the defense. What were your first impressions of Cooper Flagg? Kind of paint the picture when you first saw him.
So the first time I saw him, it was the EYBL session 1 in Orlando. It was a live period. And typically what happens is all of us, college coaches, high school evaluators, NBA scouts, whatever. I don't think NBA scouts weren't allowed at EYBL sessions yet. So they weren't there to see this, but this was the year of DJ Wagner and Justin Edwards. And I had just seen so much of them. I just was like, I need to see something new and different. So I knew Cameron Boozer was playing. I'd heard about Cameron and Caden Boozer. And I was like, oh, it was like in an auxiliary court on that Worldwide of Sports campus. And so you had to walk maybe like a half a mile. And I was like, whatever, it's nice out. I'll go and walk and see some 15s. So I went there, and on this court, on this like corner court, was Knight Riders Elite. So Cameron and Caden Boozer. And then diagonal, I saw this Maine United team. And I said, the EYBL has a team in Maine. And so one of the Nike guys, I was like, hey, who's this Maine team? And they're like, that kid right there, he might be the best player here, regardless of 15, 16, 17 US. Like, from Maine? Are you serious? And I was like, I got to watch this. The ball tipped. He tipped it to his brother Ace, and then ran for a alley-oop dunk. That was play number 1 on offense. Then on defense, like you said, he's an elite shot blocker. He pinned the ball on a layup on this poor kid. And I don't even think this team knew what they were dealing with. And then ran in transition, another midi pull up. And I was like, I've seen enough. John Stovall, I will watch this kid for the rest of the weekend. And I was the only one there. So I started calling college coaches. And one of them I called was John Shire. And he said, okay, you're at 15 U's. I said, yeah. He said, I'm sending Emil Jefferson, who at the time was on the Duke assistant staff. He's like, I'm sending Emil. Can you point him out to him? And I was like, absolutely. I am not going anywhere. So then after the game, I got to talk to Cooper. He was just like a brace-faced kid, still very, very youthful, and not the polish that we're seeing him in the way he speaks to the media. And, and I was just like, what is your dream school? Like, where do you want to go? I think you are a kid that, and he's like, oh, you really think so? And I was like, absolutely. And so from then on, the next game, you saw so many college coaches. John Shire came. We had Calipari come. Jay Lucas, who's now is an assistant at Duke, he was there with Calipari. I saw Scott Drew. If you know anything about Scott Drew, this man loves coffee, and he was in line getting coffee at like the snack bar. I was like, Scott, I don't care what you're doing. I don't care that you need your coffee. Go to court 6 right now and watch this kid play. And he's like, oh, you really think so? I was like, yes, go to. So like then Cooper was the buzz coming out of that weekend, along with Cameron Boozer. And from then it's just like skyrocketed.
See, I wish I would have had that experience, because the first time I saw him in person, everyone was aware of him. And even like the guys on offense already knew, like maybe he had blocked their shots in previous tournaments. They were literally not challenging him. Like, a guard would get to the paint, he'd see Cooper, he'd plant on 2 feet, kick it out, and they rerun the offense. So I wish I would have.
I wish I would have filmed that game. I didn't even think to like get clips of that game, like a 14-year-old Cooper Flagg. Like, I wish I would have filmed that. Nobody was on the baseline filming him. Nobody was watching them play. It was something like I will never forget. And it's something me and Cooper still talk about to this day.
It's probably the last time he played a game and didn't have 10 guys on the baseline.
Right.
So I still remember it seems like it was a long time ago, but it wasn't, when I used to film games, and it literally would be me and Baller's Life and Courtside Films as the only guy, and you as the only people on the baseline filming. And now it's like, I mean, people are filming on their phones and they're uploading the dunk to social media before you even get to halftime. The game has definitely changed. All right, up next, we're going to have a little bit more fun, talk about a few more prospects and first impressions. I want to hear Krysten's first impression of Dylan Harper, the player who I think is going to be the number 2 pick in the 2025 NBA draft. I want to let you know that this message is brought to you from our sponsor, Intuit TurboTax. And are you tired of the endless waiting, wondering, and worrying about your taxes? Well, now that is a thing of the past. You see, taxes do not need to be complicated or stressful. TurboTax is here to change the game by matching you with a TurboTax expert who can get to work on your return right away. No more waiting for answers. No more wondering if you're missing out on deductions. Whether you got one form or 20, TurboTax experts give you your taxes, they give your taxes their undivided attention while you get real-time updates on their progress, so you can focus on what really matters, which is the NBA draft. I'm kidding, but you won't have to lift a finger, and you'll get peace of mind knowing that your taxes will be handled by pros. So if you're ready for stress-free taxes and the most money back guaranteed, head over to TurboTax.com today. You can get matched with an expert who is ready to take your taxes off your plate so you can focus on your day. And it is only available with TurboTax Live full service, real-time updates only in the iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. All right, second segment. Krysten shared her first impression of Cooper Flagg. And I'm jealous because, like I said, by the time I saw him, he was a known commodity and he was the most feared defender in the high school ranks. But I want to hear your first thoughts on Dylan Harper. When did you first become aware of him? When was the first time you saw him?
It was a little later. I mean, I knew the name when he was a sophomore, but I didn't see him in person until he was a junior. And it was late in his junior, like, because he's on the East Coast. I was living in Utah at the time. So, but the first time I really got to watch him in person was at a EYBL session in Phoenix. By then, he was already one of the top guards in the country. And he was creating a buzz. He was a priority for, Duke, Rutgers, I don't know, even remember. I know those two were like the head coaches and 2 other coaches were there watching him. But just in terms of his improvement, like when I first saw him, he was still more of that bigger guard, that bully guard. And as his high school season progressed, and even now into Rutgers, when I saw him here in Las Vegas, he's really worked on his body. And that's something that NBA scouts have really taken notice to, because he just had a little bit of that baby fat. I'm sorry, it was. But the fact that he has made that a priority and is really honed in on that to make him more versatile in terms of his foot speed, because the player that I saw that spring is completely different than the player I saw at McDonald's All-American when he was the MVP and who we're seeing at Rutgers. So in order to see like what his ceiling is yet, we don't know, because I still see him progressing to different aspects of his game, whether that's the pull-up 3 or reading the PNR better, defensively, really getting after it in the backcourt. So Dylan Harper, first time I saw him, I didn't understand the buzz, but now through the last 3 years or 2.5 years or whatever, I've really seen the growth. And you're right. I think he will be the number 2 player off the board.
I have a friend of mine that's an NBA scout who, before this season, absolutely hated Dylan Harper's body. That's all he talked about. I don't see it. I don't like his body type. He would say he didn't like his brother's body type. He was just anti-Dylan Harper. I want to say it was until, I guess, the Thanksgiving games. Maybe it was like the Notre Dame game. And he was like,
well, how could you not be like pro Dylan Harper after he had 35 plus in back-to-back games? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he was just coming into the season. He was not a huge fan. All right, let's talk about VJ Edgecombe. His story is a little bit different. Kind of came out of nowhere. I had wrote about it. I think it was earlier or last summer where he just kind of like skyrocketed. Like he just
Yes.
kind of came out of nowhere. Can you tell me your first impression of VJ Edgecombe and a little bit about his story, how he goes from unknown to like a top recruit in just a matter of months?
VJ Edgecombe, I remember the game that I was watching. I remember exactly where I was. It was Hoop Hall West, his junior year. And you could see the athleticism when he was warming up. And you're like, okay, this kid can fly through the lane. Like he was making that very known. And college coaches were allowed at the Hoop Hall West this year. NBA scouts were not. And so what we saw, how he picked apart IMG Academy. And this is a game where, I like to ask players, I'm like, what game or what tournament, was there a moment in high school where you knew that you could play with the best, that you were a dude, that you could compete at a high level? And he credits this event, Hoop Hall West. He had just transferred to Long Island Lutheran. He was playing with Kyan Anthony, who was just a sophomore. And he just had these dunks. He had the best dunks of the entire weekend. I think he finished with about 18 or 22 points. And afterwards, when I was talking to him, like he wasn't used to all of the attention yet. And he's telling me, I said, where are you from? He said, the Bahamas. And I said, how did you get to New York? And he said, oh, well, first I was in Florida with Anthony Ricks, who's his AAU coach. And he thought Long Island Lutheran would be more competitive for me. So I moved up here, but I didn't know how cold it got here. I didn't have a thick winter jacket. So when it started snowing, my teammates were laughing at me like, dude, you need a coat. You need a winter coat. So just his story and how naive he was, not only coming here from the Bahamas, but also not knowing how good of a prospect and how good of a player he is, was so fun to see. Like those just like wide eyes of like, oh, people want to talk to me. And at that moment, I mean, I think he had only had like Central Florida and Ohio, Miami of Ohio or whatever, like very low mid offers. And when I talked to him in the fall, he said, I was like, why'd you choose Baylor? And he said, actually, Baylor was the last high major school to offer me. They took their time. They really wanted to see me in person because at the time it was Duke, Kentucky, North Carolina, all that. But he chose Baylor because he loves Keontae George. And he watched him all of his games at IMG, and he loved seeing the development that the coaches did with him at Baylor as well.
Is his story any different, or is it similar to Deandre Ayton's story, how he came from the Bahamas? I think if I remember correctly, Deandre like had a scrimmage against like North Carolina or something like that, and he got discovered. And I want to say when I first saw Deandre, I think it maybe when he first got to the school in Phoenix. And it may have been Hoop Hall West. I know it was in Arizona, and I know it was a tournament that when I was with API, we were there. But tell me like your first time seeing Deandre Ayton and if his story is similar to VJ's.
I saw Deandre, and you know what? They are similar, but they're not, because as soon as Deandre came over, everyone knew exactly who he was. I think VJ was a little bit more of a slow burn, but I remember, I used to work side by side with Eric Bossy, who's at 247 Sports. I would film all the games, I would do the interviews, and then I would start writing, a couple years later. But DeAndre, I saw him at Tarkanian Classic his freshman year, and I said, no way, this kid is a freshman. Like he was just all skin and bones, but he could run, and he had great hands. He had great footwork. And you're seeing this as a freshman. And I remember Bossy saying, he's like, you're going to love this kid. I'm like, what? No. He's like, he just came from the Bahamas like 2 or 3 weeks ago. And so seeing him as a freshman, and then I was at that Hoop Hall West, Rafael. DeAndre was the MVP, but remember that Trayvon Duval dunk?
I was there.
I know that. That's what sticks out to me the most. Like I remember I have this interview of DeAndre Ayton, and he's holding his MVP trophy as I'm interviewing him. But that Trayvon Duval dunk is the thing that like I remember more than anything from that tournament.
I was there. I filmed it. And you want to know what's interesting about that? That was my first time seeing DeAndre in person. And I want to say statistically he had a good game, but I felt like, ooh, he could have had 40 and 20 if he wanted to.
Right.
And I
Right.
still feel that way to this day, even though like on paper he's productive. I think he leaves a lot of points and rebounds on the table. But yes, I forgot all about that Trayvon dunk. I wasn't on the baseline for it. That's the only thing I regret. I wasn't on the baseline. I was actually in the crowd because we had just came from Vegas, and I think I was like sick, and I was like, I'm just gonna sit down at the top of the bleachers and set my tripod up and film. But I wish I would have had it from the baseline. And then I guess the part that made me upset was that I was like API's team videographer, and because I didn't have the best view when it went viral, it wasn't my video that went viral.
Yeah.
I do remember that. All right, up next, we're going to talk about a few current players or current college stars. Also, we're going to mix in some current NBA players that Krysten first saw, and I want to hear her first impression. Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions that you forgot about or that you were paying twice? It has definitely happened to me. I had a few subscriptions that I didn't even know about or I totally forgot I was paying for. And Rocket Money made it easy for me to track them down. And it is basically like having a personal assistant for your finances. And if you're wondering, what is Rocket Money? It is a personal finance app that helps you cancel your unwanted subscriptions. It monitors your spending, and it helps you lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings it all together in one place. There's over 5 million users. They have saved users a total of like $500 million in canceled subscriptions. So you, the listener, you can cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/locked-on today. That is rocketmoney.com/locked-on. Again, rocketmoney.com/locked-on. All right, last segment. Let's talk about Jeremiah Fears. Fears is, in my opinion, the biggest or one of the biggest, if not the biggest riser for this 2025 NBA draft class. He was not on my radar as a one and done guy. And I'll be honest. I mean, I heard a couple of people say, I saw it in high school. I didn't see it, but right now I think he's a top 10 pick. What were your initial thoughts of Jeremiah Fears?
Jeremiah Fears, he's someone that I would know because of his older brother, Jeremy Fears. And so when Jeremy would come to USA basketball, whether it was like a training camp or a tryout, Jeremiah would be, kind of sticking along with his parents, with his dad. And so I got to know Jeremiah through watching his brother Jeremy, and then watching what Jeremiah did last year at AZ Compass Prep. I called some of the games on the EYBL Scholastic League. And that's when I started seeing like, okay, yeah, I understand he's small, but he is tough as nails, this kid. He is so tough. There was this one game they played here in Las Vegas last year during the NBA Cup, the Emirates Cup. And so there was one game and he took an elbow, like a really hard elbow to the eye, to the point where it wouldn't stop bleeding. So he had to get stitches. So he had stitches above his eyes. And we're like, well, clearly he's going to be out for next game. His eye was like swollen shut and he came back and played basically with one eye and like still had, 15 points and 8 assists. Like it was, and I'm just like, this kid is tough. And so I knew he was tough. I'm with you. I didn't really see him as a one and done prospect, but watching him at Oklahoma and what he's doing there, it's been so fun. And I love guys that just come out of nowhere and surprise you. And you're right. He has been the biggest surprise and the biggest riser for me this draft cycle.
I hear there's a younger brother that could be next in line. I don't know his name, but I hear there's 3 of them. But they say the younger one could also be next in line.
I'm in.
Yeah. Because actually his older brother, Jeremy, is playing well. And he has a unique story from, getting – I guess he was like shot in the leg as an innocent bystander at a over Christmas break last year, and he's been playing well. I have a funny first impression for you. You'll laugh at this one. I've told this story before, so bear with me. So I used to train kids, and I used to train at this gym in Dallas called Prestonwood. And so I would train this kid. We would play 2-on-2. Oh no, we would train. I'm like, we need to play 2-on-2 so you can implement the stuff that we're working on in real life game actions. So he has a brother, and it's the kid that I'm training and his older brother. And we play this really skinny little kid that's shooting on another court. So we're playing, and the kid looks like he's about 9 years old, but he was probably like 12 at the time. And we're playing, and I'm losing. My team is losing to this kid, and I'm exaggerating. Maybe he was 11. And anyway, so the kid is really little, but he's shooting these threes. And once he shot the ball, he made it, but he's shooting it like literally from his waist. And so whenever I had the ball, I was able to score because obviously I'm a grown man at the time. But then whenever we didn't get the ball, he was like frying me. I'm talking 8-9 points in a row. I'm embarrassed. Like, I can't believe I'm letting this kid like destroy me. So anyway, time goes on. I see Trae Young over years.
I knew it was going to be Trae, yeah.
And I'm like, he looks familiar. And so obviously I know who he is because I would see him on the circuit, and we played against him when he was when he was in high school. Like, there was this secret matchup that we had of Trayvon Duval and Trae Young. We played at like some Indian resort in the middle of Oklahoma. It was pretty much closed doors. So anyway, Trae gets drafted, and the kid that I'm training sends me a message, and he says, well, how does it feel to know that the kid that was killing you when he was younger was actually Trae Young? And it hit me like, oh my God, that was Trae Young. I mean, he looked So my first impression of Trae Young was this little guy is shooting from his waist, but he's making NBA level threes at like 11 or 12 years old. And I don't feel so embarrassed that he was making shots on me. So that was my first impression of Trae Young. What was your first impression of Trae Young? And did you see him before him and Michael Porter Jr. were teammates, or your first time seeing them when they played together?
I saw them both and Trae Duval all at USA Basketball. That was a really fun group. That was a really fun time for USA Basketball.
Yeah.
So, but at that point, Trayvon Duval was the number one point guard in the country. We knew how shifty Trae was, and he could knock down threes, shoot threes from everywhere on the court. So that was probably, Trae Young. Yeah, no, not Trayvon. No, not Trayvon Duval. No, absolutely not. Yeah. Trae Young. And so from there, it was like in between his sophomore and junior year, and he was playing for MoKan Elite. Him and Mike had just teamed up, and they were playing up a division, and they still both just like looked like babies, And then by his junior year, when he was at the Nike Skills Academy and running drills with LeBron, and he had just cut his school list down to 4. I need to find this interview. And he was so nervous, and he kept wanting to like redo the interview because he's like, I want to practice. I want to get good at speaking to people like you who interview me. So, and then he's like, he'd watch the interview and be like, I say too much. I really need to work on that. So seeing him plugged in even on that side of things. But anytime I would interview either Trae, Michael Porter would be in the background doing something stupid. Anytime I would interview Mike, then Trae would be in the background doing something stupid. People don't realize that the two of them are still super close. Like, they were best friends in high school. They're obviously teammates on MoKan Elite. They won gold medals for Team USA, and they were drafted in the same draft class. And, going through that with one of your boys, I mean, Mike fell all the way to 14. And I remember he came through on draft night, and I'm interviewing him, and we knew how good he was in high school, Rafael. Like, we saw him. He was the number one player at one point, and then he had 2 back surgeries, and so that's why he fell. But I was like, I think you are the steal of the draft. Like, that is, you can't predict how people are going to recover from substantial surgeries like that, but he and both Trae have been so fun to watch in the NBA for both the Hawks and the Nuggets.
I remember like reading the Clippers were told like he's undraftable. Like they wouldn't draft him because of the intel on his back. And then you think about that, and then you think about they had SGA and they traded him. I still don't think the Paul George trade was a mistake. I think that's the deal that you probably try to make at that particular time. But let's talk about Michael Porter Jr. Pre-back injury. I think he was a different player than what he is today. He was more so of a isolation shot creator, shot maker. I think now he's kind of limited to being a guy that shoots a lot of threes. What were your first thoughts on MPJ when he was the number one player in the country?
He could get a bucket whenever he wanted. He was finishing above the rim. He played with absolutely no hesitation. And now you're right. Like, you have 2 or 3 back surgeries. You have to limit your physicality. So when we see him as more of like a 3-point specialist, or, a 2 dribble pull up that we're seeing with the Denver Nuggets, and that sort of third option on the court, third or fourth option. I mean, he's had to make adjustments. But in high school, when he was playing with no inhibition, he was running the court. Like, I remember this game, it was in Washington. It was just a random, game in December. And like, just the entire gym, because that's where he was from. Remember, he was first committed to University of Washington till there was a coaching change. And then his dad got hired in Missouri. So the entire family moved to Missouri. And he was only going to go and play wherever his dad was coaching. But the gym was electric. He probably could have, just like DeAndre Ayton, probably had 40 and 20 if he wanted. And I say that a lot about AJ DeBonsa too in high school. Like, he has the ability to have those 40-point games, but chooses not to. And that's the way Michael Porter Jr. was playing. He was so fun. Him, Harry Giles, before Harry Giles got hurt, were 2 of the most fun high school players to watch when they were at their best.
Yeah, no, I agree. I had a chance to watch Harry in person. One player that I did not get a chance to see in person while he was on the high school circuit was Anthony Edwards. I need your first Anthony Edwards impression.
Okay, and so and it's funny that he backs this, because he won the MVP of the NBPA Top 100 camp when he was, I think, a junior. He was just killing everyone. Like, he was just playing with people. And then that summer we saw his recruitment really heat up. He obviously elected to stay home and go to Georgia and be closer to his family. But he was just like one of those. He reminded me of a more physical and better playmaking Donovan Mitchell at the time. Because I remember Donovan Mitchell in high school and how he was just like, he had the capability to take over games late in the fourth quarter. Like, he was just like playing with people, and that's what Ant was. And just like his athleticism, he could have been a 5-star wide receiver or a 5-star shooting guard. He chose basketball,
He tells you that.
Yeah. I said, well, why did you choose basketball? And he said, oh, I saw my older brother dunk a basketball when I was in 8th grade. And I thought, well, that would be fun to do. And I tried to dunk, and I did, and it was fun. So I chose basketball. I'm like, what? Like, just to be able to have that sort of, physical strength, and already when you're just in 8th grade, like, oh, that looks fun. I guess I'll be really good at basketball. But yeah, he was really fun to watch.
Yeah, I wish I would have had a chance. Just seeing him at such a young age, and just the confidence that he always exudes. And I wish I would have saw when he was like unknown, and how people would have reacted to this guy that's kind of like unknown, and how he's just coming in and killing. Because I had heard of him before, but he wasn't on like any of the big circuit teams.
Right.
So he was kind of known, but under the radar in a sense. It's kind of like, can he do it against better competition? And so I wish I would have been there to see like when he was at that camp, to where guys were like, okay, he's legit.
Yeah.
Well, that wraps up this episode. It was fun. Just kind of talking about seeing players for the first time.
Memory lane. Going down memory lane.
Yes, because I totally forgot about that Trayvon Duval thing. I'm going to have to go through one of my hard drives and find it. But that's why Krysten is great, because she has so many stories of seeing players before they like blew up and became known to mainstream audiences. So we're probably going to have to do this again. Once again, thank you for making this your first listen of the day. Again, check out the Locked On newsletter at lockedondaily.com. Hopefully everyone has a great weekend. I am snowed in, which means I'll be watching a lot of college basketball tomorrow. Once again, it's Rafael and Krysten Peak, and we are out of here.